Good morning, and thank you so much for joining me for a Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Tester. You know what I like to do on the show. I want to enlighten, inspire, and empower you to become your best self. Now, Scripture reminds us that the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And today we want to get you fired up about the footsteps of Christ. We want to get you fired up about your spiritual development and what you think about as far as your faith and where you are going. Now, we are in a vast world, and we have so many different cultures and so many different peoples that are around us. Can we learn from others? Can others learn from us? And what are we saying when we speak to others? What does it say about who we are as spiritual beings? Well, that's what I'm going to talk about today with my guest, Pierce-Kelley, and I think you are going to be in for a treat. You know what I'm about to say. Go on, get comfy, get cozy, get your coffee or get your tea, because we are about to get started. Good morning, Pierce. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Angela. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I'm so glad that you're here. Now, usually I ask people, I usually read off everyone's bio, but, that can be a little stuffy, that can be a little boring. So I want to ask you, in your own words, who is Pierce-Kelley? What are some exciting things that you have done?
Well, I'm a 72-year-old man, so I've done quite a bit in my life, but most recently I have, and I mean for the last 30 years, I have been an author. I've been an attorney for almost 45 years, so that's, for many years I said I was a lawyer who wrote books on the side, and now I say I'm an author who practices law on the side. But
I like it.
And I'm very happy to be able to say that, because it is a passion for me. But the reason that I am on your show today, and what I hope to share with your listeners, is my most recent book, which is entitled The Jesus Trail: Following in the Footsteps of Christ. And that book is the fifth in a 5-book series, and it involves it's a novel, but it involves a young Coptic Christian boy who has escaped from ISIS, and he's undergoing a challenge of faith, because 21 of his Coptic Christian brethren were beheaded by ISIS in February of 2015, which is true. Of course, there were no survivors, so I created this fictional character in order to have a narrator for the story. But the first 4 books lead up to this final book, which is about the journey that I actually took, and it's written through the eyes of this 16-year-old Coptic Christian. But I walked from Nazareth to the Sea of Galilee last April, and then on. I didn't walk to Jerusalem from there, but I did go to the old city of Jerusalem and spend several days there. So I think what's most interesting about what I have done, and would be of perhaps interest to your listeners and to you, is about that journey that I took to the land of Israel, and of which I've written this book. So that's who I am.
I love it. I love it. Now, the fact that you mentioned that there is a series, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that's one of the questions that I have for you. Why did you decide that not only did you need to write a book, but why was it important that you shared information in a series?
Actually, I wrote the first book, which is entitled Massacre at Sirte, 3 years ago, and I did so because I was watching TV, as I expect many of your listeners were, when ISIS paraded 21 men in orange jumpsuits in front of the camera. They filmed it, and then they proceeded to behead those 21 Coptic Christians in Sirte, Libya. That actually happened, and I can see it vividly to this very minute, and it terrified me. But I wondered, who were those Christians that were being killed in Libya and throughout the Middle East? And so I did some investigation and determined that they were Coptic Christians. And to be honest, I didn't really know a lot about Coptic Christians at the time. And so I did quite a bit of research, and the book that I wrote is really about the conversation those 22 men would have had the night before they were beheaded. And it's all fictional, of course, and it's all my imagination. But in it, the 22 men talk about the history of the Middle East, and specifically with regard to the problems that have developed over the centuries between Jews, Muslims, and Christians. And so it really becomes somewhat of a comparative religion exercise. And so I wrote that book in order to really learn myself more about it, but also to share with others what I've learned. Now, I should add to your question about who I am, I have written almost 24 books. So, I mean, this wasn't the first book I've ever written, and so I've written a number of other books over the last 30 years. But the reason I wrote that first book was to really tell that story. And to be honest, I didn't really have any intention of going further with it. But then I had somewhat of an epiphany, and I decided to carry the story further and to write 4 more books. And the second book involves this boy being taken from Egypt and hidden in India because ISIS now wants to find and kill him. First, they released him and told him to tell the world what he has seen and what he has heard, because ISIS likes to do those kinds of things and make the world fear them. And but then when he became a hero in his country, they didn't like that, so they went looking for him. So in this second book, which again is fiction, he goes to the southern tip of India. Now, I don't know how much you know about Christians called Mar Thoma, M-A-R, meaning sea, or Thoma for Thomas. But Mar Thoma Christians exist to this day in the southern state of Kerala, Kerala, in India. And as you probably know, that India is 80% Hindu, so I honestly thought it was going to be mostly about Hinduism, but it turns out that 80% of the people in Kerala are Christians. And this really amazed me, because I just didn't know this, and maybe you did, and maybe your listeners did, but St. Thomas, the doubting Thomas, walked from Jerusalem and then to Antioch, and then from Antioch he walked to the southern tip of India, which is an enormous distance, and he created this church called the Mar Thoma Christian Church, which, as I say, exists to this day. And so that was book 2, and it talks about Hinduism, Buddhism, India, and it's an interesting book too, and it brings in more of the comparative religion issue. Book 3, this young boy goes to the Big Apple in the United States, and he loses his values, and he gets caught up in the Big Apple and all the splendor of what that involves. Now, book 4, I did something that I think you will be of interest in, or have interest in, as well as the listeners. I walked myself the Camino de Santiago. I walked 500 miles from Saint Jean Pied du Port in northern France, or southern France actually, to Santiago de Compostela in northern Spain, and that's a very famous, the most famous pilgrimage in all the world, Christian pilgrimage. And I did that to write book 4, which was entitled Pilgrimage. So in book 5, this last one, the one we're going to be talking about here today, I have this young boy. He wants to learn more about Jesus, and so he decides to walk from Nazareth to the Sea of Galilee, following in the footsteps of Christ as best he can, reading all of the 4 Gospels, and going to all the places that are identified in those 4 Gospels, as I did, and then tell what he and I learned in the process. It's a long answer. I hope I didn't go too far into that.
No problem. My next question for you is when we're writing, many times we have an end goal in mind, in that there's a particular message or lesson, something that we're trying to share. As far as the last book is concerned, The Jesus Trail, Following in the Footsteps of Christ, what is your hope that readers will have what takeaway from having read that?
Actually, I think that's going to be something that each individual reader will have to decide for himself or herself, because a large part of what I did in this entire 5-book series is address the issue of what we as Christians can do to stop the carnage that continues to this very moment. And Christians are still being killed in various parts of the Middle East, especially now that it looks like ISIS might get another foothold. But the real point is that if Christians like us just say, we are right and you are wrong, and Muslims say the same thing, and Jews say the same thing, so do Buddhists and Hindus, where are we going to get resolution? How is it going to end? So I think that a large part of what I have done and what I've, or at least attempted to do, is shed light on those issues and show the ways in which there are similarities, and to try to just, I think, with better understanding and more knowledge, then it helps to bridge the gap, so to speak. I mean, I think it's an ambitious assignment, but at the same time, I do think it's necessary for the world to do on a global scale to just stop killing each other in the name of religion. That really is the bottom line to it all.
I can definitely understand that. Now, it is almost time for us to go to break, Pierce, but I want to make sure that everyone is reminded of a few things. One, what is the title of your book? Next, where can we pick up a copy? And finally, how do we stay in contact with you?
The book is available through Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and also through my publisher, which was Westbow. It's also available at my website, and people can contact me through it, and that is www.pierce, P-I-E-R-C-E, Kelley, K-E-L-L-E-Y.com, and I encourage them to do so.
I love it. All righty, listeners, now you know where you can pick up a copy of the book. We'll be back right after this.
Discovery. No, just a sec.
What would it look like if we listened more? Could the right voice, the right set of words, bring us all just a little closer, get us to open up, even push us further? It could, if we took the time to listen. The most inspiring minds, the most compelling stories. Download Audible and listen for a change.
Anne, Camilla, William and Fred. The 4 in the Humvee are on a perilous journey, halfway across the country, to a tent city near the Mississippi River, a long ways from Boston. Through each bend and turn, they meet some people in need and others who have evil in their souls. 4 unlikely heroes in a Humvee on an unlikely trip, the recipe for a captivating story. Grab this book, EMP Casualty by Michael Kravitz.
And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Chester. My guest today is Pierce-Kelley, and we're talking about his book, The Jesus Trail, Following in the Footsteps of Christ. Now, I know that we all have a desire to be the best that we can possibly be, and I am so excited to be able to talk to Pierce more about his journey on his visit. That is so exciting. I know. So, Pierce, my next question to you is, and thank you so much for being able to spend some time with us here today, is what did you learn? You've written 5 books. What did you learn while you were writing and sharing with the reader?
Oh, my. I learned so much that I didn't know before I left for Israel, that it's a hard question to answer in a short amount of time. But let's just start at the top. I mean, I was raised Catholic, and so I have, I think, a fairly good knowledge, or at least I thought I did, of Christianity. But going to Israel and actually going to Nazareth and seeing the place where Jesus was born, and then walking as I did to the Sea of Galilee, you just, to see it with your own eyes is an entirely different matter. To see the land, I have to say that once I actually got to the Sea of Galilee, I was struck by how small it was. It was not a large area at all. In fact, that big lake up there in Atlanta, just north, is an awful lot bigger than the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is not a sea at all. It's fresh water, and it actually, Israel gets 1/3 of its water from the Sea of Galilee. But here was the most, and I've got a lot to tell you, but the most unbelievable occurrence for me was when I went to a place called Magdala, because we all know of Mary Magdalene, but she was actually Mary of Magdala, or Mary the Magdalene. But what was interesting about that is that in the last 100 years, the Sea of Galilee has been going down. And so in the last 10 years, actually I think it's now 12 or 13, they have made some discoveries in Magdala, and it's an amazing story how it came to be. A Spanish or a Mexican priest bought 4 small little lots in this place on the Sea of Galilee, and it turns out that underneath was one of the earliest Jewish houses of worship, temples. And they discovered stones, and they discovered coins from the days of Tiberius that date to 31 A.D., which would have been the very time when Christ was walking the earth. And so it's an enormous discovery for the country of Israel and for the church. He was a Catholic priest, and that they found a stone that's of tremendous historical significance, which is now in the Vatican, and a copy is somewhere in Israel. But it was there, and that wasn't the only discovery that's been made within the last 10 years or so. They've made other discoveries of places around the Sea of Galilee that were not known of, or not discovered, I should say, or rediscovered, until the last 10 years. Now that was really, miraculous, actually. But then, the next thing is that as you stand on the top of a Mount Arbel, as I did, overlooking the Sea of Galilee, and you look to your left, and you can see the northernmost parts of the Sea of Galilee, which is Capernaum, And then you look to the south and you see where the Sea of Galilee ends, and that's where the River Jordan leaves the Sea of Galilee, and that's where Christ was baptized. And I went there too, which was interesting. But I have to say that Capernaum was Christ's second home on earth. After he left Nazareth, he went to Capernaum and lived there for 3 years. But if you read, it's recorded in several of the 4 Gospels, Christ was not accepted by Capernaum. Christ said that, woe to Capernaum. You saw all the miracles I performed, and yet you didn't believe. Woe unto you. And then there were 2 other cities, and these were the other 2 cities that were part of what's called the evangelical triangle. And they rejected Christ. Well, they didn't reject him so much as they didn't accept him. I don't think they really knew what to make of him in the sense of his ability to perform miracles, and so he wasn't embraced. And then, of course, we know what happened when he went to Jerusalem. But if you think about it, all the things he did, and he wasn't accepted even by his own apostles, even the 12. Right up to the very end, they were still doubting to some extent, didn't quite understand or fully appreciate who he was. I mean, Peter denying him 3 times, and Thomas, put my fingers in his where the spears were. So those who were with him and saw him didn't accept him as he should have been accepted. So, and then of course Jerusalem's a whole different adventure, and but I guess I'll just stop for a minute, because as you can tell, I get carried away when I start things.
Not a problem, and I can understand. I have had many friends that have gone on this wonderful pilgrimage, and they all have stories, and it takes a while to really share all of the beauty, the magnificence, all of the confirmations and those things that excited and disappointed you about the trip, and it just the smells, the foods, and just take it all in, because from what I understand, it isn't like many of the other places that you visit. So it has its own stories, and it's especially the fact that it ties into our faith. So it's even more special, I think, because of that. So I can understand. Now, with all of your travels and all that you have done, there's always a story to tell, and a way that you can share your faith through your writing. So I have to ask, is there going to be another book, or are you done, or do you think that you might have another book or 2 in you?
Oh, no. I'm writing a book. I just returned from Ireland. I walked 100 miles along the Ring of Kerry, and I'm in about maybe halfway to 2/3 of the way through this next book, and this next book actually goes a step further in some ways. But before I tell you about that, I do want to tell you about the Jesus Trail, because it actually, you said many people have been there, but actually the Jesus Trail, the one I went on, is of recent vintage. It's only been in existence for about 10 years, and by that I mean
I meant the visit, the pilgrimage itself to.
Yeah, but I mean the actual trail, because I followed a trail. And I went from bed and breakfast to bed and breakfast, but it's now a commercial operation where you can do it, but it had never been done before, and so it is somewhat recent to be able to walk literally in the footsteps of Christ from Nazareth to the Sea of Galilee, into Capernaum, and all the other areas, and so that is something that's a little different than I think perhaps other journeys have been on, and so it's just walking the land is in itself different because you come across places which involve the Old Testament like Joshua and that whole story of the Exodus from Egypt, but Moses didn't make it to the Promised Land, and it was Joshua who led the Jews into the Promised Land, and he's the one who led the Jews against the walls of Jericho and against all the others. And so you walk all those areas because Joshua was the one who assigned the 12 tribes to their specific areas of Israel, and so you're walking in that area too. So it's more than just about Jesus in that regard. And I'll tell you what else. It was really unbelievable to me. Really, Nazareth. It's a town of about 75,000 right now, and of that, 3/4 are Muslim. And there's not many Jews there either. So I mean, you really learn a lot about the political situation in Israel by being there as well. Being near when you're at the Sea of Galilee, you look across and you see the Golan Heights, and that's where Syria dominated and had cannons up until the War of 1967. So there's a lot of history of Israel that you learn, and the politics of the Middle East, because it's not a very big country. It's not a very big country at all. So being there, you get a sense of all of that too, the geography and the Jordan River. It's not a big river. It's not, but it's the dividing line between Israel and Jordan, and it's obviously of great significance to Christians. But it's a special place too. So yeah, you learn a lot, not just the Christian aspect of things, but also about Judaism and Islam and the politics of the area. So, I hope I answered your question.
Sure. So we have about a minute left in the show. So my question to you is what nugget of wisdom would you like to pass on to our listeners?
A nugget of wisdom. Well, I would tell them that they are going to have to read my book to get the full answer to that question, and there are a number of nuggets within that. But I think the takeaway from that entire experience for me has more to do with the extent to which Christians, and specifically Coptic Christians, have endured suffering for literally over 1,500 years at the hands of Islam, as have Jews. But I'll tell you this. This is one of the things that just amazed me. From what I have learned, 1/3 of the population of the world is Christian, 1/4 is Muslim, but nobody believes this when I tell them, but only 1/10 of 1% are Jewish. So Jesus was a Jew from the day he was born till the day he died, but and we are followers of Jesus, but Christians have been oppressed, and for centuries, for thousands of years, and yet they have stuck true to their faith despite that, and to this day. So it's remarkable. So really, the book, at least I hope the readers, those who read it, will find it to be inspiring in that way.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. So, Pierce, before we sign off for the day, if you could you remind everyone what is the title of your book, where can we get a copy, and how do we follow you online?
Again, it's The Jesus Trail, Following in the Footsteps of Christ, published by Westbow Press, and it's available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or through my website, which is www.pierce-kelley.com.
Pierce-Kelley, thank you so much for being on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela today.
Thank you, Dr. Angela. It was my pleasure.
And listeners, thank you as well. And as always, may the Lord continue to shine his face upon you. May you receive his grace and his mercy in all that you do. Until next time, everyone, be blessed in the Lord. Bye-bye.